My father dismissed my dreams, favoring the golden child and refusing to support my education. But I found a way to rise above it all and get my well deserved revenge. I have a younger brother who is 28, and we were raised by our dad, now 56, ever since middle school. Our family dynamic was always a little unbalanced, with my dad showing a clear preference for my brother. Over time, I learned to accept it, but the sting never really went away. I've never been the kind of son my dad wanted. Unlike him, I had no passion for sports or the so-called macho activities boys are often expected to enjoy. Instead, I found joy in things that some might label as more traditionally feminine. I was a self-proclaimed mama's boy drawn to the kitchen, books, and singing. The kitchen in particular was my happy place, a world of creation and comfort. My dad, however, couldn't relate. He tried to bond with me through football, but I lacked both the skill and interest. As our differences became more pronounced, we drifted apart. My brother, on the other hand, was everything my dad could have hoped for in a son. He was fearless, athletic, and embraced the rough and tumble nature of boyhood. He thrived on getting his hands dirty, whether it was in sports or other physical activities. Naturally, my dad adored him. It was painfully clear who his favorite was, as he always had words of pride for my brother, but rarely for me. My mother, on the other hand, never played favorites. She loved us both equally and made sure we knew it. That fairness made me cherish her all the more. I tried to connect with my dad and mend our growing rift, but by the time I reached high school, his disinterest in bridging the gap was evident. The glue that held our fragile family together, my mother, passed away when I was in the 8th grade. Her battle with cancer was swift and brutal, leaving us with little time to prepare or even hope for recovery. Her death was a devastating blow, especially for me. I spiraled into a deep grief that I had no idea how to handle. My only refuge during that time was the kitchen. Cooking became my lifeline, my therapy, and my way of keeping her memory alive. Every dish I created felt like a tribute to her. My mother had always been an incredible cook, and she often confided in me that had she not been forced to take over her father's business, she would have pursued her dream of becoming a chef. That dream became my solace and my anchor. In contrast, my dad and brother dealt with their grief by shutting it away, suppressing their emotions completely. Instead of drawing us closer, from that day on, our relationship was effectively severed. I stopped trying to win his approval, and he didn't seem to care. The few conversations we had were perfunctory at best, just enough to get by. I retreated to my room, pouring all my energy into music, studying, and perfecting new recipes. Cooking wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was my lifeline, a way to honor my mother's memory and prove to myself that I could make something meaningful out of my life. Meanwhile, my brother didn't offer any support either. He mirrored our father's indifference, treating me like I didn't exist. After my mom passed away, I felt truly alone in the world with no one to turn to for comfort or encouragement. When it came time to apply to colleges, I knew I had to take a leap of faith. I sent applications to a mix of top culinary schools and traditional universities, hoping to keep my options open. That summer, I secretly interned at a local restaurant to gain some real-world experience. The chefs there became my mentors, and they even wrote me a glowing recommendation letter, which gave my applications a much-needed boost. To my amazement, I was accepted into several schools, including one of the top culinary institutes in the world, located in France. It felt like a dream come true. For the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of hope for my future. But that hope was tinged with anxiety because I knew I'd have to ask my dad for his approval, and more importantly, for financial support. I spent days rehearsing what I'd say to him. I was prepared to plead my case, to convince him that this was my passion and my path. I braced myself for him to belittle my dreams or dismiss the culinary arts as an unmanly profession. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was his outright refusal to pay for my tuition. I can still vividly recall the confusion and disbelief I felt when my dad flat out refused to pay for my education. It wasn't as if he couldn't afford it, far from it. My dad was financially well off and could have easily covered my tuition in France without batting an eye. But money wasn't the issue. His refusal stemmed from something far more frustrating. My success, he said, might make my younger brother feel insecure. At the time, my brother was struggling with his grades and having a hard time focusing on his studies. My dad believed that supporting my dream would somehow undermine my brother's confidence. He insisted that I either settle for a local community college or find my own way to pay for culinary school. I was stunned. How could a father prioritize one child's ego over the other's aspirations? I tried reasoning with him, explaining how important this opportunity was to me and how much it meant for my future. But he remained unmoved. He even went as far as to say that my brother's well-being was his topmost priority and that he didn't want me competing with him. Hearing those words broke something inside me. I couldn't believe that my own father would crush my dreams just to coddle my brother. After hours of pleading, crying, and trying to make him see reason, I realized he wasn't going to budge. The situation escalated into a massive argument during. I can still vividly recall the confusion and disbelief I felt when my dad flat out refused to pay for my education. It wasn't as if he couldn't afford it. Far from it. My dad was financially well off and could have easily covered my tuition in France without batting an eye. But money wasn't the issue. His refusal stemmed from something far more frustrating. My success, he said, might make my younger brother feel insecure. At the time, my brother was struggling with his grades and having a hard time focusing on his studies. My dad believed that supporting my dream would somehow undermine my brother's confidence. He insisted that I either settle for a local community college or find my own way to pay for culinary school. I was stunned. How could a father prioritize one child's ego over the other's aspirations? I tried reasoning with him, explaining how important this opportunity was to me and how much it meant for my future. But he remained unmoved. He even went as far as to say that my brother's well-being was his topmost priority and that he didn't want me competing with him. Hearing those words broke something inside me. I couldn't believe that my own father would crush my dreams just to coddle my brother. After hours of pleading, crying, and trying to make him see reason, I realized he wasn't going to budge. The situation escalated into a massive argument during which I said things I probably shouldn't have, but I was too hurt to care. In the heat of the moment, I made the decision to leave his house for good. I moved in with my maternal aunt, my mother's older sister. The only reason I hadn't done so earlier was that I found comfort in the house where I'd grown up with my mom, and I didn't want to switch schools during my senior year. But at that point, staying with my dad was unbearable. When I arrived at my aunt's house, I told her everything. I confessed how my dad had refused to pay for my tuition and how much I needed her help. Asking her for such a huge favor made me feel awful, especially since she wasn't nearly as wealthy as my dad, but she reassured me with kindness and determination. She rallied her friends, pooled together resources, and somehow managed to cover my tuition. Thanks to her unwavering support, I was able to attend the culinary school of my dreams. I'll never forget the gratitude I felt toward her and everyone who believed in me when my own father didn't. Once I arrived in France, I knew I had to make the most of this incredible opportunity. I worked part-time to help with my expenses, balancing jobs alongside an intense academic schedule. I threw myself into my studies and honed my skills, determined to prove that every penny spent on me was worth it. By the time I graduated, I wasn't just another student. I was among the top of my class. My hard work paid off when I landed a job just a few months after graduation, solidifying my place in the culinary world. They claimed they were there to surprise me, and I must admit they succeeded. I was absolutely stunned. My father and brother greeted me warmly, acting as if the years of neglect and hurt had never happened. Their sudden shift in demeanor caught. His sports career had also fallen apart. Despite my dad's high hopes for him as a football star, my brother's lack of dedication led to missed opportunities. He hadn't earned the coveted sports scholarships that could have paved his way to prestigious universities. Instead, he had ended up at community college, the very path my father had once deemed unworthy for me. Now, they had come to me with a request, one I found both audacious and insulting. They wanted me to make my brother a partner in my business. Their reasoning was that this would provide him with a more respectable position and a better future. The irony was staggering. My brother, who had done nothing to contribute to my success or even support me during my struggles, was now being presented as someone deserving of a share in the restaurant I had built from the ground up. It was infuriating, to say the least. They had ignored my ambitions, dismissed my dreams, and even sabotaged my journey, yet here they were, expecting me to hand over a piece of my hard-earned success on a silver platter. I had to fight the urge to burst out laughing when they made their outrageous request, but instead, I kept my composure. With a calm demeanor, I told them I'd think about it. Of course, I had no intention of entertaining their proposal, but I didn't want to send them packing just yet. I had a much more satisfying plan in mind. Rather than outright rejecting them, I invited them to stay for the party. After all, what better opportunity to deliver the truth than in front of the people who had supported me throughout my journey? My father and brother seemed genuinely pleased with my invitation, oblivious to the storm that was about to unfold. As the evening progressed, the guests began arriving, and soon the room was filled with friends, colleagues, and supporters. My father and brother mingled with everyone, putting on a facade of pride and admiration for me. I overheard them boasting to others about my success as though they'd played a part in it. Their gall was almost impressive. When the time for toasts arrived, my business partners spoke first, expressing their gratitude and excitement for the journey we'd embarked on together. Their speeches were heartfelt, and I couldn't have asked for better partners. Then it was my turn. The room quieted as I took center stage, drink in hand, ready to deliver the speech I'd been crafting in my mind for years. I started by thanking everyone who had supported me, especially my late mother. I raised my glass to her memory and shared how she had been my source of inspiration and strength. It was her unwavering belief in me that had carried me through the darkest times, and it was only fitting to dedicate this milestone to her. From there, I transitioned into the story of my journey, highlighting the challenges I faced and the sacrifices that had been made. I expressed my deep gratitude to my aunt who had stepped in when my own family had failed me. Her generosity, along with the kindness of her friend, the crowd erupted into cheers, clapping and whistling at what they believed to be a heartfelt reconciliation. Little did they know, this was my way of making a point. My father and brother had no choice but to smile and go along with it, even though I could tell they were seething inside. They couldn't storm out without causing a scene, and the irony of that was not lost on me. As the evening wound down and the last guests left, my father and brother waited for me outside the restaurant. Their expressions had changed entirely. Any pretense of warmth was gone. They were furious. My brother, clearly on the verge of tears, demanded to know why I had humiliated them in such a public way. My father, for once, stood silent, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You could have just turned us away," my brother shouted, his voice breaking. "If you never planned to help us, why go through all of this?" I couldn't help but laugh. "Because," I said calmly, "this is what you deserved. All the years of neglect, all the times you dismissed me, this is me paying you back in kind." Their protests and pleas blurred into the background as I walked away without looking back. My brother's cries and threats about how I'd regret this didn't faze me. By the time I got into my car and drove off, it was as though they were nothing more than a distant memory. When I told my aunt about what had happened, she admitted she thought I might have gone too far and suggested it would have been better to simply turn them away at the door. But I disagreed. To me, this wasn't cruelty. It was closure. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd reclaimed my story on my terms. I had no intention of reaching out to my father or brother to apologize, despite my aunt's insistence that I had been too harsh. I stood by my actions and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. They had every chance to acknowledge their mistakes or offer an apology when they visited, but instead they doubled down on their entitlement. I explained my stance to my aunt, and while she didn't agree, she seemed to accept that we'd have to agree to disagree. Thankfully, she hasn't pushed the issue further. Meanwhile, my brother has taken to spreading lies about me to old acquaintances from high school, twisting the story to paint himself and my dad as victims. The rumors have been ridiculous, claims that I served them spoiled food and then threw them out of the restaurant in front of everyone. While I'd normally ignore such petty nonsense, this has started to reach people outside of our circle, including potential customers. To put an end to it, I sent my brother a message warning him to stop or face the consequences. I even told him that if he didn't quit spreading these falsehoods, I'd contact his current employer and share exactly how untrustworthy he is. I hoped that would be enough to shut him down, but I underestimated just how delusional he could be. Instead of apologizing or backing off, he texted me back with the audacious demand that I make him a partner in the restaurant. I could hardly believe the gall. Does he not understand how absurd it is to badmouth the very business he's trying to weasel his way into? I can only assume this is another of my father's schemes to secure a cushy position for his favorite child without him lifting a finger. Too bad for them. It's not going to work. I made it clear to my brother that if he didn't stop his antics immediately, my lawyers would be stepping in. He's in no position to bargain with me, and the sooner he realizes that, the better. I have far more important things to focus on, like ensuring my restaurant thrives than wasting time on his petty drama. The only reason I haven't taken drastic action yet is that I don't want to be dragged into unnecessary drama. However, I've made it clear to my brother that this is his last warning. If he crosses the line again, he'll have no one but himself to blame for what follows. Update 3. It's been about a month since I last shared an update, and things have been hectic. My brother did stop spreading rumors, but it's clear that desperation runs deep in my family. A few weeks ago, my dad and brother decided to escalate matters by showing up unannounced at my house. Their new tactic, threatening to sue me over the use of my mother's name for the restaurant. They claimed they'd already consulted a lawyer and were prepared to take legal action unless I made my brother a partner. Of course, I wasn't the least bit intimidated. No credible lawyer would entertain such an absurd case, especially since she was my mother, not just his wife. I called their bluff immediately. I was done entertaining their nonsense. I told them in no uncertain terms that if they didn't leave me alone, I'd have no choice but to involve the police. My brother